Behind the radiant smiles, the carefully choreographed public appearances, and the hopeful photographs lies a haunting truth that has been hiding in the shadows of Kensington Palace. The public sighed in relief when Princess Catherine announced she was fine and recovering. But now, a new shock has emerged. A whistleblower doctor, once closely linked to the royal medical circle, has confirmed that the truth is being deliberately concealed. The princess is not merely resting due to general health issues. She is silently battling a cruel and relentless disease, cancer. This revelation hits like a thunderbolt, striking at the carefully curated image of stability the royal family has tried to maintain over the past months. Could it be that behind the stage lights and the reassuring statements, there is a woman struggling with pain, with chemotherapy, and with an unbearable solitude no one outside those palace walls can fully grasp? Could the prolonged silence have been less about privacy and more about shielding a terrifying truth? The monarchy dares not speak. If the doctor's claims are true, then it is not just one individual who is suffering, but an entire system that may be exchanging public trust for total control. In this video, we will peel back the layers of secrecy and expose what is truly being hidden behind the cold stone walls of the British monarchy, where sometimes the truth is more frightening than any lie. To the public eye, Catherine was always glowing, smiling, flawless. But reality, as it so often is in the royal world, was far more complicated. The layers of duty, family, and physical strain had been building for years. Then came the public revelation that shook the illusion. Kensington Palace made the shocking announcement Princess Catherine had been diagnosed with cancer. The news, while jarring, was quickly wrapped in optimism. A brief statement assured the world that Catherine was already in treatment and responding well. A collective sigh of relief followed. She was young, beloved, and strong. Surely she would bounce back. In the months that followed, it seemed she did. A few brave public appearances, quiet reassurances from senior aides, and eventually the official announcement of her remission painted a hopeful narrative. But hope, it seems, had been carefully curated. While the palace was busy calming fears, an undercurrent of unease was growing behind the scenes. The palace didn't celebrate the remission with fanfare. Instead, it emphasized a condition, a careful disclaimer, that her return to royal duties would be taken one day at a time. For a family that rarely shows its cracks, this caveat spoke volumes. It was a warning masked in diplomacy. The message was clear to those who looked closer. Something wasn't right. While the public applauded her bravery, those closest to her knew the battle was far from over. The contradiction was hard to ignore. How could a woman hailed as a symbol of royal perfection, always polished, always composed, still be too unwell to resume her duties fully? What exactly was being held back from public view? It was this haunting contradiction between glamour and fragility that began stirring whispers inside and outside palace walls. Because if Catherine had truly conquered her illness, why did her schedule remain so erratic? Why were high-profile events still being skipped? And why, despite smiling photographs and optimistic statements, did every new appearance seem tinged with hesitation? The fairy tale was fraying at the edges. Behind the impeccable outfits and rehearsed smiles was a woman still grappling with a private storm, a storm the palace desperately wanted to contain. But just when it seemed she was returning to normal, a sudden disappearance left even the palace in chaos. She was scheduled to appear, but when the time came, the royal car stayed empty, and the silence was deafening. Ascot isn't just another social gathering on the royal calendar. It's a defining moment, a stage where tradition, fashion, and hierarchy collide under the sharp lens of global attention. Catherine's name had been confirmed. Her team had given every indication that she would attend. The expectation was set in stone. But when the gates opened and the world waited for the Princess of Wales to step out in full regalia, nothing happened. The absence was immediate and unsettling. There was no delay, no polite excuse, No carefully worded palace statement, just a glaring vacancy that no one could explain. Behind the grandeur, the reaction was chaos. Multiple staffers, according to royal insiders, were left standing in confusion, whispering the same phrase again and again. What is going on? The words weren't spoken with annoyance. They murmured in disbelief. Because Ascot isn't something you miss lightly. It isn't the sort of event you back out of at the last minute, not when you're Catherine, not when the royal household has spent weeks preparing your wardrobe, your motorcade, and your seat placement. Something had gone wrong, and it hadn't just gone wrong quietly. It had unraveled the entire illusion of stability the palace had worked so hard to project. The media, quick to catch a crack in the royal facade, erupted into speculation. Tabloid headlines buzzed with theories. Was she ill again? Was there another setback? Was this the beginning of a new royal crisis? The timing of her absence couldn't have been worse. Just months earlier, the palace had declared her in remission, framing it as a slow but steady return to normal life. And yet, here she was gone from one of the most visible royal spectacles of the year without explanation. Insiders began drawing chilling parallels. They remembered the winter of 2023 when similar silence surrounded her extended disappearance from the public eye. Back then, the official story was a routine abdominal procedure, but it snowballed into months of absence, mounting concern, and finally the revelation of her cancer diagnosis. Now, once again, the royal communications machine had gone quiet. The resemblance to those dark days was impossible to ignore. Was history repeating itself? Or worse, had it never really ended? The sudden no-show wasn't just a logistical hiccup. It was a signal that the remission narrative may have been more fragile than it appeared. Behind the scenes, her health might be deteriorating again or never fully recovered at all. Every hour without a statement fueled further panic. Every insider whisper added weight to the possibility that the truth was being buried. And while the palace scrambled to contain the fallout, one undeniable fact remained. Catherine's absence had set off alarm bells not just in the press, but within the monarchy itself. Her role is not ceremonial, it is symbolic. And symbols, when they vanish, leave voids that demand answers. The truth didn't come from a palace statement, but from an unthinkable event just days later. She woke up feeling off, but no one expected what would follow in the next 48 hours. The 18th of June began like any other morning inside Kensington Palace. The schedule was set, the security briefings delivered, and the royal aides moved through the corridors as they always had. But in the private quarters of the Princess of Wales, something was wrong. Catherine had risen later than usual, visibly drained, and unable to shake an unexplainable fatigue. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was something deeper. Something her own instincts warned wasn't right. She had experienced bad days before, many of them in the long aftermath of her cancer treatment, but this was different. When palace doctors arrived, it was meant to be precautionary. They had seen her push through public engagements with worse symptoms, and Catherine, by all accounts, was not one to complain. But this time, her silence was unsettling. She lacked her usual resolve. Her composure was absent, and her voice, usually steady even in illness, was faint and reluctant. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted. The physicians did what they could: blood work, vitals assessments, but the improvement never came. The hours passed, and with each one, the sense of urgency crept closer to panic. Something was deteriorating, and fast. By midday, whispers among the staff became more than just concern. One aide reportedly excused herself in tears after seeing Catherine pale and unable to rise without assistance. The idea of hospitalization was floated, then hesitated. Royals do not get rushed to hospitals unless absolutely necessary. It sends a signal. It invites headlines. But Catherine's condition gave them no choice. Quietly, discreetly, and without fanfare, a transport was arranged. Within hours, She was moved into the care of specialists under complete media blackout. That decision sent shockwaves through the palace. Even senior aides, who had been briefed on Catherine's long recovery, were taken aback. No one had anticipated a sudden collapse. No one had prepared for a hospital stay so soon after the remission announcement. The optics were damaging, yes, but more than that, the emotional weight was unbearable. It meant that despite the royal narrative of resilience, Catherine was still battling something much bigger than anyone had let on. Behind every elegant appearance and carefully staged photo was a woman still walking a tightrope between strength and survival. And while the palace clung tightly to silence, the truth was now impossible to hide. Catherine's health wasn't just a footnote in her royal story, it was the headline. Her body had been through months of torment, and now it was speaking louder than any PR strategy could suppress. Whatever had happened that morning was a reminder that her condition had never been conquered. It had only been quieted. But if the palace thought it could control the narrative, the silence only made the whispers louder. For a family that controls every photo and phrase, why are they letting the rumors run wild when the Princess of Wales was quietly rushed to the hospital? On the 18th of June, the nation braced for an official update, but it never came. No photographs were released, no health bulletin was issued, and not a single senior royal made a statement to calm the storm. Instead, the palace turned inward, retreating behind its time-honored walls of silence, hoping the storm would pass if they just waited it out. But in the age of relentless media and a public desperate for answers, silence doesn't soothe, it suffocates. And in this case, it did something far worse. It made the world suspicious. The royal communications team, normally swift in spinning narratives, chose ambiguity over clarity. No denials, no confirmations, only vague reassurances issued off the record, passed like whispers between reporters and aides. It was a strategic vacuum, one that allowed speculation to metastasize. Instead of extinguishing the panic, they poured fuel on it. Questions began to mount not just about Catherine's health, but about the integrity of the institution itself. Why was the palace so evasive if this was just a minor setback? Why the cover-up, and most damning of all was the remission announcement ever the full truth? Then came the most unsettling blow. Concha, a veteran journalist known for accuracy and discretion, broke the silence from outside. Her report wasn't based on palace press releases. It came directly from insiders and painted a grim picture. According to her sources, Catherine's condition had been misjudged internally. Staff had expected a recovery, but instead witnessed deterioration. There were moments of real fear behind those palace walls, where aides feared not only for her health, but for the optics of losing control over the narrative. Concha's report detailed the missed warning signs, the rushed hospitalization, and the internal scramble to keep the truth from the public. The effect was instant confidence in the palace began to fracture. The public, once trusting and patient, began to voice doubt. What else had they been misled about? If Catherine was truly in remission, why were there no regular appearances? Why had she vanished from the summer schedule entirely? And why had her recent events been marked by cautious, almost ceremonial movements, as if she were being presented rather than participating? The secrecy did more than protect her. It isolated her. It turned Catherine from a symbol of grace into a cipher for anxiety. And in doing so, it chipped away at the very foundation the modern monarchy has worked so hard to rebuild: transparency, trust, and relatability. The royal family had always relied on carefully curated images and brief statements to guide public perception. But this time that strategy backfired. The absence of information became the loudest sound of all. And just when you think things couldn't feel more uncertain, a darker truth emerges from those closest to her. Behind the polished gates, she fought alone against something far stronger than headlines. What the public saw was a woman stepping back into royal life with cautious optimism. What they didn't see was the 18-month war being waged in silence, an invisible, excruciating battle that stretched far beyond the official statements. Princess Catherine's struggle was not a straight line from diagnosis to remission. It was a labyrinth of setbacks, fatigue, invasive treatments, and emotional breakdowns that tested every ounce of her strength. While the cameras caught brief smiles and polished appearances, behind palace doors, her reality was slipping into something darker and more desperate. Concha's report didn't just confirm the rumors, it blew the lid off the palace narrative. According to her sources, the months leading up to June had been a spiral. Moments of hope were crushed by recurring health scares. Treatments that once showed promise began to fail. Catherine wasn't simply recovering, she was barely holding on. There were nights when doctors were summoned in panic, and mornings when she couldn't lift herself from bed. Behind the royal image was a woman clinging to survival, forced to manage not just her deteriorating health, but the unbearable pressure of projecting strength to a world that would not accept weakness from a princess. Sources within the palace have revealed that senior aides had quietly prepared for the worst. Emergency protocols were drafted not for public events, but for private emergencies. The staff, once trained in managing logistics and ceremony, were now navigating hospital visits and late-night consultations. Her condition had grown so precarious that at one point a contingency plan was discussed in case her absence needed to be explained in far more somber terms. These were not the whispered concerns of tabloid speculators. These were the internal fears of those closest to the royal family, people who had watched her slip in and out of medical care while the public was told she was simply resting. The toll wasn't just physical. Emotionally, Catherine had become hollowed by the fight. Every injection, every scan, every failed promise of improvement left its scar. The weight of duty, combined with the torment of an uncertain future, broke down even her famously composed exterior. She was exhausted, not in the way most people imagine, but in the way that leaves you numb. That kind of exhaustion doesn't go away with rest. It consumes everything, your ability to function, to connect, to hope. And yet, she endured it with a level of grace that no press release could ever capture. For the public, the word remission had sounded like victory, but now the curtain has been pulled back. What they saw was not a princess reborn. It was a woman surviving day by day, moment by moment, with no guarantees. Recovery was not a destination, it was a battlefield. And each day she opened her eyes was not a step forward. It was a reminder of how much she had already endured just to stay alive. And then, for the first time, she finally let the public in. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was raw, real, and impossible to ignore. For months, silence had cloaked Catherine's suffering like a velvet curtain, elegant on the outside but concealing a world of agony within. The palace released only calculated phrases. The media speculated endlessly. But when Catherine finally chose to speak, she didn't offer a press conference or a regal address. Instead, in a quiet moment shared through trusted channels, she uttered something so disarmingly human, it cut through the noise with brutal clarity. There are good days and bad days. That simple, honest confession shattered the illusion of royal invincibility. It didn't come from a throne, it came from a place of exhaustion, of acceptance, of raw truth. Those words didn't merely describe her physical state, they revealed her soul. Catherine, known for her restraint and polished composure, had broken the unspoken royal rule of emotional distance. She laid bare the reality of living with an unpredictable recovery, one where triumph and collapse often happen within the same week. Friends close to her shared that in the days following two of the year's most demanding events, Trooping the Color and the Order of the Garter, Catherine was drained beyond measure. One source said she had simply reached her limit. Her body had performed, her smile had held, but internally she was wrecked. The strength it took to endure those days came at a heavy cost. Behind the cameras, she was not celebrating success. She was collapsing from it. It was after those events that the reality became undeniable. Even to her most optimistic aides, Catherine wasn't just recovering, she was surviving in cycles. Every step forward demanded a sacrifice. Each appearance stole from her reserves. And while the public hailed her as resilient, the emotional toll was more complex. She wasn't choosing strength over vulnerability. She was being forced to live in both simultaneously. And it was in this contradiction that she found unexpected clarity, the emotional weight of pretending to be well, of fulfilling a role built on image and tradition, finally gave way to something deeper. Catherine began to realize that true strength wasn't found in meeting expectations. It was found in honoring limitations. She no longer measured her value in public appearances or headlines. She began to prioritize health, presence, and peace. The cancer, the treatments, the exhaustion, they had stripped her of the illusion that duty could come before self. And in that raw awakening, she found purpose. This vulnerability didn't make her weaker in the public eye. It made her relatable, real, and more respected than ever. People no longer saw a distant royal figure. They saw a woman navigating an excruciatingly human experience with grace, honesty, and determination. Her struggle redefined what strength looks like, not as polished perfection, but as the courage to say, I can't do this today. And with that clarity, she rewrote her royal script completely. She once followed the calendar, now she makes the rules. In a world governed by tradition, where every royal move is choreographed down to the minute, Catherine's quiet rebellion didn't come with grand speeches or press briefings. It came through silence and absence. The palace had long relied on her to fulfill roles, not just with duty, but with perfection. Her schedule was once rigid, carved into stone months in advance. But as her body and spirit continued to bear the weight of illness, she began to see the futility of that structure. And more importantly, she found the courage to break it. No more endless appearances, no more pushing through pain just to satisfy expectations. Catherine began to say no, and in the royal world, that was nothing short of revolutionary. From the outside, it looked like selectiveness, but inside it was survival. She chose her engagements carefully, not based on optics, but based on whether her health could withstand them. Events once considered mandatory suddenly slipped from her calendar, and rather than justify each decision, she let the absence speak for itself. Each appearance now held more weight, more intention. She wasn't disappearing. She would be defining. What might have once been criticized as evasiveness was instead met with understanding, even admiration. Prince William, her partner in public and private, stood firmly behind the shift. His support was unwavering, not just in words, but in action. He adjusted his own schedule, took on additional responsibilities, and ensured that Catherine's new pace wasn't seen as weakness, but wisdom. Together, they forged a new rhythm, one that prioritized health, family, and presence over relentless tradition. And in doing so, Catherine's role evolved. She was no longer just a beautiful figure in a centuries-old institution. She became a symbol of balance in a system built on sacrifice, a modern woman choosing self-preservation over self-destruction. Her strength wasn't in doing it all, it was in knowing when not to. That kind of quiet authority resonated beyond palace walls. For the first time in a long time, the public didn't just admire her, they related to her. They saw in her a reflection of their own battles, their own boundaries, their own moments of needing to step back in order to move forward. Catherine didn't lose her status by changing the rules. She elevated it not because she clung to power, but because she redefined what that power meant. And as she took control of her calendar, she took control of her narrative. The princess the world once knew had evolved into something far more powerful than polished appearances. She became a voice for its measured resilience, not performative perfection. And when she finally stepped back into the spotlight, it was nothing short of a statement. She didn't need words. Just one step onto that balcony said it all. On the 14th of June, the Princess of Wales returned not with a speech, not with a declaration, but with presence, a presence that felt louder than any headline, more powerful than any announcement. As she appeared at the King's birthday parade, all eyes locked on her, not out of duty, but out of disbelief. She stood there, not as a flawless royal icon, but as a woman who had been to the edge and returned, visibly cautious in her movements, her frame thinner, her gaze more focused. Catherine didn't attempt to conceal the strain she carried, but that's exactly what made the moment resonate so deeply. Her vulnerability wasn't masked, it was embraced. Just days later, Garter Day brought another defining image. The photographs that emerged weren't just ceremonial, they were historic. Here was a princess who, by all insider accounts, had spent the past year in and out of hospitals, cloaked in secrecy and battling silent suffering. And yet, she stood before the world, wearing the weight of recovery with unimaginable grace. It wasn't the fanfare that made the public react. It was the quiet determination in her posture, the way she didn't seek the spotlight, but honored it anyway. As if she understood the world needed reassurance, not just that she was okay, but that she was still fighting. The public response was immediate and emotional. Tears weren't just shed by well-wishers and crowds. They were felt through screens across the globe. It wasn't just relief, it was recognition. Catherine had become more than a princess. She had become a symbol of perseverance, of strength that doesn't roar, but endures. For months, people had debated her condition, questioned her silence, and speculated about her future. But all of that fell quiet the moment she reappeared. Because her return wasn't performative. It was powerful, a carefully timed act of bravery that turned concern into inspiration. Even in pain, she exuded elegance. But it was a new kind of elegance, one forged through suffering, not rehearsed through protocol. Her presence on those royal grounds wasn't a performance. It was a declaration that healing is not linear and strength is not about appearances, it's about endurance. She hadn't returned because she was fully healed. She returned because she chose to show what it looks like to keep going. In the eyes of many, Catherine's quiet comeback carried more weight than any throne speech or state visit because it was real, because it reflected a truth people rarely see in royalty, that even the most admired, the most composed, can break and still rise. Her journey is no longer about being the perfect future queen. It's about being a human being with scars, walking back into the light on her own terms. But behind the pageantry, she's holding tighter to the people who matter most. She traded tiaras for tree walks and never looked happier. After months of uncertainty, public anxiety, and the burden of palace protocol, Catherine found herself in the one place that offered something no medical intervention could bring peace. Far from the stone walls of royal duty, Norfolk became more than a country retreat. It became a sanctuary. There, without cameras, without aides, without the looming weight of expectation, she rediscovered herself not as the Princess of Wales, but as a woman who had almost lost everything and who now refused to let anything take precedence over the life that remained. In Norfolk, Catherine wasn't preparing speeches or orchestrating appearances. She was present in the smallest moments where healing happens unnoticed. Long walks beneath trees with Prince William at her side, watching their children run freely across open fields, cooking quiet meals, embracing silence rather than running from it. These were not acts of recovery for show. These were acts of survival, of choosing simplicity after complexity, of choosing family over the formality that had nearly buried her under its pressure. The world, used to seeing Catherine adorned in jewels, now glimpsed something more precious, a mother holding her daughter's hand, a wife smiling in conversation with her husband, a woman who had known pain deeply enough to know what truly matters. These images didn't make headlines. They weren't paraded in glossy spreads, but they were captured in whispers from locals, in glimpses that told of a woman letting herself simply be. This shift wasn't temporary, It wasn't a sabbatical. It marked a new era in Catherine's life, one where her role would no longer be dictated by palace agendas, but by personal truth, where her value was not determined by attendance, but by authenticity. In many ways, this quiet retreat was the boldest choice she'd made, not because it defied tradition, but because it embraced what tradition had too often ignored: the humanity behind the crown. And in doing so, Catherine may have stumbled upon her most powerful legacy not as a queen consort carved from royal ceremony, but as a woman who lived through a storm and returned not to the throne but to the roots: a mother, a partner, a survivor. Someone who fought her battles not for headlines, but for moments like these, moments that remind her why she endured. The crown may someday rest on her head, but her legacy will be etched in the lives she touched, the truth she chose to share, and the values she chose to live by, far from flashing cameras and scripted gestures. And for the first time, that legacy doesn't need to be spoken. It's felt in every quiet, honest moment she now holds close. Yet the story doesn't end here, because the silence has one final chapter left. If the worst were to happen, if Princess Catherine, the elegant, strong, and most beloved woman in the current royal family, truly departs because of a cruel illness, then who would bear the immense weight of the future queen's role? This question doesn't just shake the hearts of millions of Britons. It forces the entire monarchy to face a gaping void that will not be easy to fill. Catherine is not just the wife of the heir to the throne. She is the symbol of fragile trust between the royal family and a new generation of the public. Her calm presence, compassion, and image as a devoted mother have long made her the queen of people's hearts, even without a crown. And if fate forces her to exit the stage of history too soon, then who can possibly step into her place worthily, gracefully, and with the people's blessing? Could Camilla, who still carries the controversial title of Queen Consort, truly become the new face of royal succession? Or will another figure emerge from the shadows, expected to replace someone as irreplaceable as Catherine? Crowns can be passed down, but public reverence cannot. And if Princess Catherine is lost, the royal family will not just lose a member, they will lose a piece of their soul. And the most painful question of all remains: will they have the strength to carry on when the one most expected to lead is the very one silently battling fate?